It's a recording, he decided. Something in the old systems got triggered. Electrical malfunction in the archive banks. A ghost signal, nothing more. He used the word ghost without thinking, then immediately wished he hadn't. Send a maintenance team to investigate. I'm going back to bed. Jex did not look convinced. Vel went back to bed anyway, because problem delegation was the foundation of good command, and chose not to examine too closely why it took him almost an hour to fall back asleep. The next morning, his chief engineer delivered the news that dismantled his electrical malfunction theory with the calm efficiency of someone used to delivering unwelcome facts. Holter was a stocky Bane female with 4 powerful forearms that she crossed in front of her chest when she was delivering information she knew someone wasn't going to like. All 4 were crossed now as she stood in his office. Section 7's power systems have been completely offline for 2 years, Commander, she said. No power grid access. No backup systems. No residual charge in any of the old equipment we checked. A pause that felt pointed. No power means no transmission capability. What came through last night was, by any engineering standard I am familiar with, impossible. Vel stared at her. Thank you, Holter. That will be all. The word impossible had begun to annoy him at a profound, personal level. By midday, the whispers had started. Stations were enclosed environments by their very nature. Recycled air, close quarters, too much proximity and too much time. Information moved through crew quarters and mess halls and maintenance corridors with the speed and enthusiasm of something alive, mutating slightly with each telling, growing more elaborate and more frightening with every retelling. Someone had told someone who had told someone else, and now the story running through Outer Reach Station's population was that Marcus Webb, the hero of the evacuation, the man who had given his life for 40,000 strangers, was haunting Section 7. Vel called it ridiculous at the morning briefing. He said it again at the afternoon check-in. He said it a third time when his security chief, a massive Vex named Kento, reported that the surveillance cameras in Section 7's lower corridors had begun cutting out, not malfunctioning in any ordinary sense, but switching to static simultaneously, as if something were interfering with the signal. And sometimes, Kento said, choosing his words with the care of a large, pragmatic being who didn't believe in ghosts but was finding his certainty tested, there's a shape in the static. Humanoid. The right size. Equipment failure, Vel said firmly. In every camera. Simultaneously. Kento said nothing. His expression said everything. The station's various species had begun responding to the growing tension in their own culturally specific ways. The Pillions were conducting blessing rituals in the mess hall at mealtimes, filling the air with scented smoke that the Torvan found offensive but endured in silence, having taken to carrying sacred protective charms of their own. Even the Bane engineers, pragmatic to the point of seeming constitutionally incapable of superstition, had begun routing their work schedules to minimize time in the lower decks. This was a significant operational problem, because the primary coolant lines ran through Section 7. This, Vel announced at the daily briefing, with the conviction of someone who has decided that reason is the only acceptable weapon against unreason, is absurd. There is no ghost. Ghosts are a form of magical thinking inadequately supported by evidence. What we have is a series of technical anomalies that require systematic, rational investigation. His medical officer raised a delicate hand. Dr. Tove was a saunt, a wispy, pale species with an unsettling number of fingers and the quiet authority of someone who had spent their entire career being the most educated person in any given room. Commander, with respect, 17 separate crew members have now reported seeing a humanoid figure in the lower decks. Same height. Same general appearance. Old-style military uniform. They can't all be experiencing the same hallucination independently. Watch me prove they can, Vel muttered, and went to get his thermal coat. He went to Section 7 alone that night. Later, he would reflect that this decision fell somewhere on the spectrum between remarkable courage and profound foolishness, and that after 30 years of command, the line between those two things had worn essentially transparent. The corridor was cold. Not the mild, comfortable temperature that the station's climate systems maintained across every section without fail. Genuinely, sharply cold, the kind of cold that had no business existing on a climate-controlled station. His breath misted in front of his snout with every exhale. Somewhere deep in the walls, old pipes groaned in the darkness, the familiar settling sounds of ancient metal. Perfectly normal sounds. The kind of sounds that, in absolute silence, in flickering half-light, begin to sound like something else entirely. The lights were failing intermittently, not all of them, not completely, just enough to turn the corridor into a sequence of shadows interrupted by pale, unreliable illumination. Vel walked slowly, his footsteps ringing against the metal floor with a clarity that made the surrounding silence feel heavier by contrast. He told himself, with diminishing conviction, that he was going to find a faulty electrical relay and a very rational explanation for everything that had happened. Then he heard the voice. Quiet. Distant. But undeniably present, threading through the cold air with crystalline clarity. Containment failing. Need to manually override. Every scale along Vel's spine rose simultaneously. He told himself it was the cold. He rounded the corner toward the old reactor core, decommissioned for decades, sealed, safe, certified inert by 3 separate engineering inspections since he'd taken command. The heavy blast door that had been welded shut before his tenure, that had not been opened since, that required specialized equipment and authorization codes to breach. The door was open. Light spilled through the gap. Blue and electric and alive, flickering across the metal walls like lightning contained in a bottle, beautiful and wrong and completely impossible. Vel's logical Kashari mind ran through its available explanations. Found none that fit. Ran through them again. Failed harder. He stepped through the doorway. The reactor room was vast and hollow, the great decommissioned core rising at its center in the blue-tinged darkness. And standing before it, silhouetted against the dead console that should have been inert for 20 years, was a figure. Human-shaped. Human-sized. Wearing a military uniform that Vel recognized from historical files, the style of the human expeditionary forces from the war era, 4 decades out of date, patches on the shoulders indicating rank and unit. The figure stood with its back to the door, head bowed slightly, one hand resting on the console as if listening for a heartbeat in the dark machinery. Then it turned. The face matched the personnel photo exactly. Early 30s, dark hair slightly longer than military regulation permitted, strong features, jaw set with the particular stubborn determination of someone who has made an irreversible decision and made their peace with it. The eyes glowed with something that existed in no medical or biological literature Vel had access to. Not quite light, not quite life, but something that partook of both. Marcus Webb looked at him across 40 years and the uncrossable distance between living and dead, and smiled. "Hey there, Commander," the ghost said, his voice carrying the faint texture of a signal traveling too far. "We need to talk." Commander Vel Re did what any rational being would do when confronted with the definitive collapse of their understanding of physics, biology, and the fundamental nature of existence. He fainted. He woke in the medical bay with a headache that felt like a small gravitational anomaly had taken up residence behind his eyes, and Dr. Tove's concerned face hovering approximately 2 inches from his snout. "You've been unconscious for 3 hours, Tove said, running a scanner along his temple with the practiced efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what the commander got himself into. "Your neural patterns are showing extreme stress indicators." "What happened?" "I saw a dead human," Vel said. His voice came out surprisingly steady, which he considered a personal achievement. "Right." Tove's expression suggested she was seriously reconsidering his fitness for command, but professionally choosing not to say so directly. "Your vitals are stable. I'd recommend avoiding any further encounters with deceased members of other species for at least the next 24 hours. Vel sat up. Immediately regretted it. Sat up anyway, because he was the commander and commanders did not lie in medical bays when impossible things were happening on their station. "Where's Kento?" Section 7. With half the security team. "When you didn't report back, they went looking." A pause. "They found you collapsed in a corridor outside the reactor room. The door had sealed itself again by the time they arrived. They've been trying to override it for 2 hours. And nothing works, sir. Also, there are sounds from inside. Movement. A voice." "One voice," Vel said. Human. Male. Approximately 40 years deceased and in possession of considerably more to say than anyone has any right to after being dead that long. He gathered himself, stood up over Tove's protests about recovery protocols and adequate rest periods, and went back to the lower decks. Kento was stationed outside the reactor room with his weapon drawn and his habitually stoic face arranged into an expression that, on a being of his size and general disposition, functioned as the equivalent of full-scale alarm. The Big Vex had once single-handedly repelled a boarding party using nothing but a maintenance tool and creative improvisation. He did not scare easily. He looked scared now. Commander. Relief replaced alarm temporarily when Vel rounded the corner. We found you collapsed in the corridor, but sir, the reactor room. Something's inside. The door sealed itself after we pulled you out and we haven't been able to open it since. And the sounds, he paused. Voices. Movement. Like someone's. Like someone's in there who shouldn't exist, Vel said. Yes. I know. Get me Raina. His technical specialist arrived within minutes, portable scanner in hand, 3 advanced degrees evident in the way she moved through a problem, with the particular focus of someone who has trained their entire career to be the person who explains impossible things with science. She had exactly 0 patience for supernatural explanations and made no secret of it. Ghosts aren't real, she announced, approaching the sealed door with her scanner raised. Then she stopped. Stared at her readings. Ran the scan again. That's a long pause. No. That can't be. She ran it a 3rd time, adjusting the calibration, checking the instrument's diagnostic systems, doing everything a thorough scientist does when their equipment tells them something their training insists is impossible. Sir. Raina. There's a quantum signature inside that room. Her voice had acquired a quality of careful, deliberate calm, the tone of someone actively choosing not to panic. Active. Coherent. It's reading as human DNA patterns, but the energy state is completely wrong for biological matter. It's as if, it's like a consciousness existing as pure quantum data. With physical properties. Self-sustaining. Organized. Vel pinched the bridge of his snout. In terms that don't require a doctorate to follow. Raina considered this for a moment. The ghost is made of angry computer code that has decided it's a person. Somehow that's worse than I expected. I know. Over the following 2 days, Marcus Webb stopped restricting himself to the reactor room. He appeared in the mess hall during the dinner service, translucent at first, visible mainly in peripheral vision, gone when looked at directly. Then in the observation deck, standing at the viewport and looking out at the stars with an expression that conveyed something complicated and private. In the cargo bay. In the maintenance corridors. Each appearance was more solid than the last. The quality of his presence deepened, like a signal growing stronger as the source draws closer. Less shimmer, more substance, less easy to dismiss as a trick of light or an overworked imagination. A pillion cook in the mess hall watched him walk through the kitchen and accidentally knock a pot of stew from its burner. Accidentally, which meant physical interaction, which meant mass, which meant whatever Marcus Webb was becoming, it was crossing a boundary that nothing should be able to cross. The cook screamed for approximately 10 minutes and subsequently requested a transfer to a station in a less paranormally active region of space. A Torvan trader in the lower cargo level reported that the apparition had apologized for startling her. Politely. With what she described as genuine regret for the inconvenience. Vel's second-in-command, a methodical Bane named Hollis whom he had never in 8 years of service seen display anything resembling alarm, came to his office looking visibly shaken. Commander, she said carefully. The ghost was in the archives this morning. Reading a data pad. Station reports, from the look of the screen. Sitting in a chair, reading them, like he had nothing better to do than catch up on 40 years of administrative records. What did you do? Vel asked. I pretended I didn't see him and sent the report to you instead, she said, with the dignity of someone who has chosen pragmatism over principle and has made their peace with it. The crew's collective state of mind had escalated beyond simple fear into something more complex, a mixture of terror and desperate, reluctant fascination. Arguments broke out in the corridors and the mess hall. Some crew members blamed Webb for the chaos that had descended on their station, for the malfunctions and the apparitions and the growing sense of wrongness seeping through the lower decks. Others pointed to the cargo bay incident, to the image of this impossible figure catching 2 tons of falling equipment with his bare hands, to his concern for a frightened young worker, to the simple decency of a creature who apologized for startling strangers. Vel called an emergency meeting. All department heads. He needed, if not answers, at least better questions. Rayner brought files, old files, war-era records from the station's ancient archive systems, corrupted beyond normal recovery but painstakingly reconstructed through weeks of data forensics that she had apparently been conducting in her own time without telling anyone. "I found the original mission reports from the battle," she said, projecting them across the briefing room screen. "The complete records, not the sanitized public version." Her voice carried the particular flatness of someone delivering information they find deeply affecting and are actively refusing to be affected by. The crash fleet wanted the station intact, to use as a forward base for deep space operations. Commander Yeltus ordered full evacuation. Everyone made it to the escape pods. A beat. Everyone except Marcus Webb. The records unfolded in clinical, devastating detail. The bombardment. The reactor breach that would have made the entire station uninhabitable within hours. One human lieutenant, alone in the lower decks after everyone else had gone, making the decision, not the forced decision, not the commanded decision, but the chosen decision, to stay behind. To manually route the coolant. To hold the core stable while the evacuation ships put distance between themselves and the closing crash formation. His final transmission played from 40-year-old speakers with perfect, terrible clarity. Tell them it was an honor. Webb out." Then silence. The station had been retaken 3 days later. They'd found him in the reactor room, one hand still resting on the manual override as if he'd simply sat down to rest and never gotten back up. Radiation exposure sufficient to have killed him several times over. The core had remained stable for the entire 6 hours he'd worked it. Alone. The briefing room was very quiet when the playback ended. "His haunting the place where he died," Kento said, softly for a being of his size. "Classic behavioral pattern." "Ghosts aren't real," Rayner said, but the certainty that had been ironclad 24 hours ago had developed visible cracks. It was Dr. Tove who delivered the piece that made the picture complete. She had been running her own analysis of the manifestation sites, cross-referencing the energy readings from every reported web sighting with the station's power grid monitoring systems. "There's a quantum signature present at every location where he appears," she said, pulling up her data. "It isn't biological and it isn't mechanical. It's quantum entangled with the station's power grid, woven into it, almost. Every manifestation draws a measurable amount of energy from our reserves. Minimal, but consistent. And measurable." "His feeding off the station?" Vel asked. "Or existing through it?" Tove set down her scanner with the air of someone about to say something they've thoroughly fact-checked and still can't quite believe. "Sir, I think he's been here the entire time. All 40 years. Embedded in the quantum field of the reactor, too diffused to manifest, too scattered to be coherent. Something changed recently. Something provided enough power and structure for him to begin pulling himself together." Rayner's head came up sharply. "The quantum relay." Everyone looked at her. 3 weeks ago," she said slowly, "we installed a new quantum relay in Section 7 to boost long-range communications. It uses quantum entanglement for faster-than-light data transfer." Her voice was very careful. If a human consciousness was already existing in a quantum state within those systems, the relay would provide an anchor point, Tove said. A stable channel. Something coherent enough to latch onto. To begin reforming around. "We turned him on," Vel said flatly. A pause that stretched several seconds too long. "Essentially," Rayner confirmed. "Yes, sir." Vel looked around the table at his brilliant, terrified department heads. "So we accidentally reactivated our ghost." That would be the technical summary, yes. "Fantastic. That's just fantastic." By the 3rd day, Webb was solid enough to trigger proximity sensors. By the 4th, he left fingerprints on surfaces, Actual, scannable fingerprints, a perfect match for the personnel file from 4 decades ago, pressed into the dust on a console in the abandoned archive room as if he'd simply leaned there while reading and forgotten to be incorporeal. The crew's unraveling accelerated. The Pillions announced they were considering abandoning their contracts. The Torvan delegation formally submitted a request for hazard pay, citing supernatural workplace conditions in language that was almost impressively specific. Even the Bane filed written complaints, 3 single-spaced pages of methodical grievances that Hollis had read twice and still couldn't decide whether to file under HR protocols or station emergency procedures. Vel was trying to maintain a functional chain of command in a situation where the concept of normal had become essentially theoretical. Then came the coffee incident. A Pillion crew member entering the communal kitchen at 0600 had found Webb standing at the coffee maker, studying it with the expression of someone reacquainting themselves with a beloved but partially forgotten object. The ghost had apparently figured out the controls. The carafe was full. He'd looked up when she entered, smiled apologetically, and said, "Hope you don't mind. I've been thinking about coffee for about 40 years. She had screamed for a disturbingly long time. He misses coffee, Vel told Kento, with the air of a man whose grip on the expected architecture of reality has become genuinely tenuous. Should we restrict his access to the kitchen? Kento asked carefully. I genuinely don't know how we would do that. The cargo bay incident changed everything. A loading crew was working a routine transfer when one of the anti-gravity lift systems catastrophically failed. 2 tons of equipment in a sealed cargo container lurched off its guides and began falling toward a young sail worker who had frozen in the split second where the brain registers catastrophic danger and the body hasn't yet caught up with the instruction to move. Marcus Webb appeared between the worker and the falling cargo. Not flickered into view. Not shimmered into partial existence. Appeared, solid, present, occupying space with the certainty of something real. The container struck him. It should have destroyed him, whatever he was. 2 tons of falling mass should have passed through him, or ended him, or simply demonstrated in the most violent possible terms that quantum-entangled consciousness has its physical limits. Instead, there was a concussion of blue-white light, pure quantum energy made visible, and the container stopped. Suspended in midair by 2 human hands and what appeared to be sheer refusal to allow anything else to happen. For a long, impossible moment, Webb held it there, every line of his form blazing with contained energy, and then he lowered it, deliberately, carefully, gently, to the deck. He turned to the trembling sail worker. You okay, kid? The worker managed a nod, too shocked for speech. Webb smiled, warm, genuine, unperformed, and flickered once, and was gone. The cargo bay stood in absolute, awed silence. Then Kento's voice came through Vel's communicator, and it was shaking. Commander. Command Center. Now. Long-range sensors have picked up a fleet inbound on our position. Vel was already moving. What kind of fleet? A pause that told him everything before the answer came. Crash Dominion, sir. 12 warships. Heavy class. Moving fast and direct. Another pause. And sir, they're hailing us. They want to discuss Marcus Webb. Vel stopped walking for exactly 3 seconds. The ghost wasn't the problem. The ghost was the warning. The command center was running at full emergency capacity when Vel arrived, screens flickering red across every station, alarms cycling in steady, urgent rhythms, 12 icons on the tactical display moving with the unhurried certainty of overwhelming force. 12 crash warships. Nobody had seen a crash fleet in 30 years, since the war had ended and the Dominion had retreated to lick its wounds and, also everyone had chosen to believe, reflect on the inadvisability of military aggression against a coalition of 15 species with deeply held opinions about sovereignty. Apparently the lesson hadn't stuck. Status, Vel said. Hollis looked up from her console, all 4 forearms working different controls simultaneously. 2 hours out. Moving at consistent approach velocity, not combat speed, but not casual transit either. They want us to know they're coming. She pulled up the transmission. They've been broadcasting the same message on continuous loop. They're tracking a quantum anomaly originating from this station. They demand we surrender it to them immediately or face consequences. The anomaly being our ghost, Vel said. They didn't specify the nature of the anomaly, but the quantum signature they described matches Webb's readings exactly. She held his gaze. Sir, the quantum fluctuations around the station have been increasing for the past 6 hours. Whatever's happening with Webb, it's accelerating. He's drawing significantly more power from the grid. Whatever he's becoming it faster. Where is he now? Reactor room, Kento said from the security station. He's been there for the last hour. Just standing there, sir. Waiting. Vel stood very still for a moment, looking at the tactical display and the 12 bright icons moving inexorably toward them across the dark. Then he went down to the reactor room. The door opened before he reached it. Welcomed him, almost. The blue light inside was brighter than before, steadier, pulsing with a rhythm that felt uncomfortably like a heartbeat. And in the center of it, more solid than Vel had yet seen him, stood Marcus Webb. He looked exactly like his personnel photo. Every detail precise, the slightly too long dark hair, the strong jaw, the uniform with its warrior patches worn with the unconscious ease of long familiarity. He looked like a man in his early 30s who had lived a full and demanding life and was entirely comfortable in his own skin. He looked, for the first time, genuinely alive. Commander Re, Webb said. His voice was clear and strong, no static, no crackling interference. Thanks for coming. I know this has all been, well, weird, Vel supplied. You've been dead for 40 years. You've been haunting my station. A crash fleet is coming to collect you like some kind of classified military hardware. Weird doesn't begin to cover the situation, Lieutenant, but it's the word we're going to use because I don't have a better one. Webb had the audacity to laugh. It was genuine, warm and slightly rueful and entirely human, and for a moment Vel was struck by the profound strangeness of standing in a reactor room talking with a legend who happened to be dead. Fair enough, Webb said. Listen, I need to explain some things before they get here, and I need you to not faint again. Think you can manage that? I'll make every effort. Webb moved closer, and Vel noticed something that stopped him cold. The man's boots made sound against the deck. He cast a shadow. When he gestured, his hands had weight and resistance and the precise quality of things that actually occupy space. How? Vel said quietly. Your quantum relay. Webb settled into the explanation with the manner of someone who has had considerable time to understand something and is now choosing the clearest path through it. For 40 years, I've been, scattered isn't quite right. Diffuse. My consciousness got caught in the quantum field when the reactor breached. The radiation, the energy release, the quantum fluctuations from the containment failure. It all happened simultaneously, and instead of just dying, I got distributed. Broken into information. Data. The math of what I was, but not the fact of it. Rayner's theory, Vel said. She's good. When you installed the relay, it created a stable quantum channel, something coherent and structured that I could use as a framework to pull myself back together. I've been slowly reconstructing, remembering the shape of being real. He looked at his own hands for a moment. It's a strange process. Why reveal yourself? Why not remain undetectable? Webb's expression shifted, the warmth still present but something darker moving beneath it. Because I'm not the only thing that got pulled through when the relay activated. It opened a door, Commander. And I came through it, but I didn't come through alone. The temperature in the reactor room dropped perceptibly. What followed you? Vel asked. The crash have been running weapons experiments for decades. Since before the war ended. Maybe before it started. Consciousness transfer technology. The goal was soldiers who couldn't be permanently killed, transfer between host bodies, continuity of self across death. I found evidence of the program during a Black Ops mission. That's why I stayed behind during the evacuation. Not just the reactor. There was classified data in the station's core systems. Research stolen from their facility. I encrypted it behind quantum keys that would require a consciousness in my specific quantum state to access. He paused. Then I died before I could finish destroying it. The data is still here. And the crash know it, Vel said. They've known for 40 years. They've been waiting for a sign that someone could unlock it. when I manifested strongly enough to generate a detectable quantum signature. You lit up like a distress beacon and told them exactly where to look.
Yeah.
Webb's jaw tightened. The entities that came through behind me, they're fragments of consciousness from the failed experiments. Not stable like me. Not coherent. They're in pain and they don't understand what they are, and that makes them dangerous. I can purge them, send them back through the quantum channels. But the data. We can't let the crash recover it. If they complete the consciousness transfer program, Commander, they will be genuinely unstoppable. An army that can't be killed by killing it. He met Vel's gaze directly. I can destroy the data. Or I can do something better than destroy it. What's better than destroying it? Webb's smile acquired an edge that was sharp and specific and had nothing warm about it at all. I've had 40 years to study it. To understand it completely. To think about what it means and what can be done with it. He let that sit for a moment. They think they're coming to capture a ghost. They have absolutely no idea what I've become. Vel's communicator interrupted. Tove's voice, strained in a way his medical officer's voice almost never was. Multiple crew members were reporting encounters with entities in the lower decks. Shadows. Figures. Things that moved wrong and left cold trails in the air behind them. They're here, Webb said simply. The things that followed me. I need to act before they become a larger problem. Then act, Vel said. What do you need? Webb looked at him, and something passed across his face that was complicated and human and clearly unexpected. You believe me, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I watched you catch 2 tons of cargo with your bare hands. I have a crash fleet demanding your surrender 2 hours out. My medical officer is reporting supernatural entities throughout the station. Vel kept his voice dry with the effort of long professional practice. At this particular point in my day, Lieutenant, I'll believe almost anything. What do you need? Webb straightened. In that movement, Vel saw clearly for the first time the officer he'd been, the soldier who had made an impossible choice in a reactor room 40 years ago and lived, if lived was still the right word, entirely without regret for it. Access to the core systems. Full access. I can purge the entities and lock the door behind them. But the data, I'm not just going to destroy it, Commander. I'm going to use it. The research works in both directions. They want to weaponize consciousness transfer. I'm going to show them, very personally, exactly why that's the worst idea they've ever had. The smile that accompanied this was not the warm, self-deprecating smile Vel had seen before. It was precise. Calculated. The expression of someone who has been planning something for a very long time and is finally within reach of executing it. They think they're coming for a ghost, Webb said again. I'm going to give them a haunting they will not forget. He paused, and the edge in his expression softened into something more honest. Commander, when this is over, when I do what needs to be done, I probably won't be coming back. Not like this. Not solid. One crisis at a time, he added, before Vel could speak. I know. Vel held his gaze for a long moment. First we save the station, he said. Then we argue about keeping you corporeal. Rayner, give Webb full access to the core systems. Kento, seal the affected sections, get civilians to the upper decks. Hollis, he was already moving, already thinking 3 steps ahead, the way 30 years of command had trained him to. Prepare all defensive systems. We're not surrendering anything to the crash today. Yes, sir, Webb said quietly. And for the first time in 40 years, Lieutenant Marcus Webb had his orders. The Crash Dominion fleet dropped out of quantum space with the arrogance of a force that had never seriously entertained the possibility of failure. 12 warships. Black-hulled and angular, their weapon ports glowing a deep, ugly red, their silhouettes designed to project precisely the combination of efficiency and violence that had made them humanity's nightmare during the war. They had been devastating opponents, brilliant tacticians, ruthless executors, utterly committed to the logic of overwhelming force. They had also, in the end, lost. Vel tried to find comfort in this fact as the fleet settled into formation and the lead vessel, a dreadnought the size of a mid-tier asteroid, covered in enough firepower to crack a moon, moved to position directly opposite the station. His stomach had migrated somewhere in the vicinity of his feet. Shields up. All defensive systems to full. Non-essential personnel to core sections. The enemy commander appeared on screen. War leader Threx of the Crash Dominion was everything the species was at its most severe: angular features, cold eyes, scaled skin the color of deep space, and the bearing of someone who had delivered ultimatums so many times that kindness had become a foreign concept. Outer Reach Station, Threx hissed. You harbor stolen Dominion property. Quantum signature designation Webb. You will surrender it, along with all classified archive data from the human war period, immediately. Non-compliance will be answered with the systematic dismantling of your station, beginning with life support. Vel kept his expression neutral. War leader. This is neutral territory under multi-species treaty. You have no jurisdiction here. I have 12 warships, Threx replied. That is jurisdiction enough. 5 minutes. The screen went dark. Immediately, weapons systems across the crash fleet began charging. Then footsteps behind him, measured, confident, deliberately audible. Marcus Webb walked onto the command deck. He looked different than he had in the reactor room. The translucency was completely gone. He was entirely, physically present, and whatever he had done in the core systems had done something to him, refined him, consolidated him. He moved through the command center with the unconscious authority of someone who has spent years making life and death decisions and carries that weight naturally. He stopped at the tactical display and looked at it for approximately 3 seconds. Rotating shield frequencies, he said, without preamble. Delta 7 cycle, every 3 seconds. Forces them to recalibrate targeting each time. Rainer, divert power from non-essential sections, route it to forward batteries. Kento, he looked at the security chief. I need firing solutions on these coordinates. Numbers appeared on his data pad. Hollis stared at them. That's empty space. That's where their ships will be in 40 seconds. Every officer on the deck looked at Vel. Do it, Vel said. The crash fleet moved exactly as Webb predicted. The dreadnought advanced, flanked by 2 cruisers, the remaining ships spreading into a containment formation. A textbook Dominion assault pattern, unchanged in 30 years because it had always worked before. The station's weapons fired at the empty coordinates Webb had specified, and for 3 excruciating seconds it looked like the single worst tactical decision in the station's 60-year history. Then the crash ships moved into those exact positions, and the station's fire met them dead center. 2 cruisers took direct hits, their shields flaring and buckling under impacts they hadn't been positioned to absorb. The crash fleet broke its formation, adapted, split, and Webb was already plotting the next firing solution, already accounting for the response he'd known they'd make. They're adapting, Kento reported, his voice tight. Changing patterns. Of course they are. Webb didn't look up from the tactical console. Threx was always smart. But smart and predictable aren't the same thing, and I've had 40 years to study his battle records. A pause. Drop the port shields for 4 seconds. The entire command deck went silent. That will allow them to destroy half the station, Rainer said, with the careful precision of someone making absolutely certain they've heard correctly. It will allow them to believe they can destroy half the station, Webb said. Kento, the instant I give the signal, drop port shields. Hollis, the moment they commit to that attack vector, everything we have fires at the dreadnought. All power. 1 target. 1 shot. Vel saw it complete itself in his mind. The bait. The commitment. The moment when 12 warships all look at the same opening at the same time and one of them has nothing left to hide behind. Do it, he said. The port shields dropped. The crash fleet responded instantly. For ships redirecting to exploit the opening, weapons charging, moving with the decisive speed of predators who see the kill clearly. And in that moment of complete, committed advance. Now, Webb said quietly. Every weapon the station possessed fired simultaneously at a single point. The beam that crossed space toward the crashed dreadnought was visible without magnification. It hit Threx's command ship like a judgment, and the dreadnought's shields didn't hold. They collapsed. The hull cracked, atmosphere venting in silver clouds, the massive ship lurching sideways and listing hard. The 4 ships that had moved to exploit the portside opening were out of position. Their firing solutions were ruined. They were trying to re-establish formation when the station's weapons found them. 2 exploding outright, a third losing its engines entirely, the 4th taking a torpedo spread that turned it into an expanding field of debris. 5 ships. 30 seconds. They're pulling back, Jack said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who cannot believe what they're watching. The fleet is retreating. Regrouping, Webb corrected. Threx doesn't retreat. He recalculates. He was already watching the tactical display, tracking the damaged dreadnought. And when he recalculates and finds nothing left that works, he paused. He'll do something desperate. The dreadnought, listing badly, bleeding atmosphere from 3 separate hull breaches, began moving forward again. Slowly. Deliberately. Not toward a tactical position. Toward the station. He's going to ram us, Kento said. Yes. Webb pulled up the station schematics. And we're going to let him get close. He raised his hand against the immediate eruption of protest. 50 meters. I need to be within 50 meters of their hull. I can disperse myself through their quantum network, take control of every system simultaneously from the inside, overload their consciousness transfer technology permanently. He looked at Vel. Get me close enough, Commander, and I end this. Vel looked at the damaged dreadnought on the screen. Looked at Webb, solid and real and glowing faintly with the quantum energy that was, increasingly, as much a part of him as anything biological had ever been. You said you probably wouldn't be coming back, Vel said. Not like this. Probably, Webb agreed. But you know what? One crisis at a time, right? You said that. Vel studied him for a long moment. When this is over, Lieutenant, whatever form this is over takes, you are authorized to remain on this station in whatever capacity physics permits. That is also an order. Webb blinked. Then something shifted in his expression. Genuine, unguarded, deeply human. Yes, sir. He turned toward the door. Webb. The man stopped. It was an honor. Whatever happens. Same, Commander. He paused at the threshold. Same. What happened next was witnessed from the observation deck by 14 crew members who had gathered there when the viewport gave the clearest view of the battle's final act, and who spent the next several weeks struggling to describe it accurately. Marcus Webb dispersed into pure quantum energy with the controlled deliberateness of a man who knows exactly what he's doing and has decided completely on doing it. The blue light that had characterized every manifestation of his presence concentrated and then expanded, shooting through the station systems, through the quantum relay, along channels that physics wasn't quite supposed to permit, and straight into the dying dreadnought. Every system on the crash command ship lit up simultaneously. Every screen, every weapons array, every piece of the consciousness transfer technology they'd been developing for 40 years, every classified archive, every data core, all of it overloading at once, catastrophically, finally, irreversibly. The explosion was visible for 3 seconds before the shockwave cleared. When the light faded, the crash fleet was gone. Destroyed, or fleeing with their hulls scorched and their databanks wiped, carrying nothing back to the Dominion that could be used to restart the war. The quantum signature that had drawn them across 30 years of waiting was gone with them. And the blue light in Section 7, for the first time in 3 weeks, went completely dark. Commander Vel Re, personal log, Outer Reach Station. They ask me, other commanders, diplomats, species who've never had much direct experience with humanity, why humans are regarded across the galaxy with a combination of respect and profound unease that no other single species grouping inspires. I used to give the standard answers. Adaptability. Determination. An apparently genetic inability to recognize when they're outmatched. I have a better answer now. We have legends. Every species has heroes, beings whose courage and sacrifice we honor and remember. Stories to tell our children about who we want to be. But our heroes, when they die, stay dead. They become history. They become inspiration. They become names on plaques. Humans have Marcus Webb, a man who died saving 40,000 lives. who spent 4 decades scattered across the quantum field of a dead reactor, trapped between existence and dissolution, neither fully present nor fully gone. Who came back, pulled himself back, piece by piece, across 40 years of scattered silence, because he had unfinished work. Who saved this station twice. Who defeated a crash war fleet with 40-year-old tactical knowledge and a quantum consciousness that had become something for which we don't have a word yet. Who then chose, deliberately and completely awake about what he was choosing, to dissolve himself into the station systems and burn their weapons program out of existence. You can kill a human. Clearly. The evidence on that point is conclusive. You cannot, apparently, stop them. Death, for humans, seems to be less a termination and more a complication. Something they note, adjust to, and work around, like bad weather or a difficult colleague. The station is quiet now. Repairs are underway. The crew is recovering with varying degrees of speed and grace. We've sealed the quantum relay to prevent future unplanned entities from following improbable paths back from whatever state they occupy. I've authorized keeping it on low power. Because sometimes, late at night, the lights in Section 7 do things lights don't do on their own. Doors open for crew members whose hands are full before they've reached for the controls. Equipment that has developed faults fixes itself overnight without any maintenance request having been filed. A Pillion engineer reported that her console, the one that's been running warm for 3 weeks, was cool for the first time this morning, and she found a handwritten diagnostic note beside it in what she described as old-style human script. I don't investigate these incidents. Some ghosts earn the right to haunt in peace. 3 weeks later, at precisely 0400 hours, Vel's communicator chirped. He had been deeply, gratefully asleep for the first time in what felt like a geological era. He groaned, considered pretending he hadn't heard it, and answered anyway, because 30 years of command had made certain reflexes involuntary. Jex's voice came through. Eye stalks almost certainly trembling. Sir. Sorry to wake you, Commander. We've received a transmission from Section 7. Vel sat up slowly. What kind of transmission? Audio only, sir. It says, a pause. It says, hey, Commander. Reactors running smooth. Get some sleep. You look terrible. Vel sat with that for a moment. Log it, he said finally, as routine station maintenance update. Sir, Jex hesitated. There's no one in Section 7. I know, Jex. Vel lay back down, pulled his thermal coat over his scales, listened to the comfortable, familiar sounds of a station running well, the hum of systems, the circulation of air, the deep subsonic thrum of a reactor core that had been maintained with exceptional care. Somewhere in the quantum channels woven through the station's bones, in the relay frequencies and the power grid harmonics and the deep mathematical structure of a place that had been, for 40 years, as close to home as anything remaining to him, Marcus Webb kept watch. The ghost had come back from the dead, fought a war, and saved them all. And then, because he was human, and humans apparently couldn't help themselves, he'd stayed. Terrifying species, Vel thought, with something that was definitively not warmth and absolutely was. Absolutely terrifying. Wouldn't have it any other way. Commander Vel Re of the Kashari species had witnessed enough strangeness in his 30 years of station command to fill several memoirs, and had, in fact, started writing one, though he kept abandoning it because reality kept being more unbelievable than anything he could invent. He had dealt with smugglers who concealed contraband in anatomical locations that defied both imagination and basic dignity. He had watched pirates attempt to breach reinforced airlocks armed with nothing but plasma cutters and a breathtaking excess of confidence. He had personally mediated a 3-way diplomatic catastrophe involving fermented algae, a trade negotiation gone sideways, and the Torvan ambassador's mating display, an incident that had required 6 months of therapy for 2 of the 3 parties involved, and which Vel refused to discuss under any circumstances. But a transmission from a dead man. That was new. The message arrived at 0400 hours, which was already an act of aggression as far as Vel was concerned. He valued his sleep cycle with the same fierce dedication he gave to station security protocols, and interruptions to either were treated as personal offenses. His communications officer, a nervous young Pillion named Jex, had practically broken down his quarters door. The small creature's eye stalks were trembling so violently they seemed in danger of detaching entirely when Vel finally answered, wrapped in his thermal coat and radiating the particular menace of a reptilian predator deprived of sleep. "Sir." Jex's voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to see this. Right now. Please." "Is the station on fire?" "No, sir." "Is anyone dying?" Not currently, sir." "Then it can wait until." "It's from Section 7, Commander." Jex swallowed hard. "From the lower decks." Something in the young officer's voice stopped Vel's dismissal cold. He studied those trembling eye stalks for a long moment, then dragged himself fully upright and pulled the thermal coat tighter around his scales. "This," he muttered, following Jex into the corridor, "is why emergencies should happen during business hours." Outer Reach Station was a monument to the extraordinary lengths that 15 different species would go to in order to make money without technically cooperating with each other. It hung at the edge of known space like a small, argumentative city, a floating hub of commerce, diplomacy, and barely contained chaos that had somehow maintained structural integrity for 60 years. 60 years of trade disputes settled at the last possible moment. 60 years of cultural misunderstandings resolved through gritted teeth and expensive arbitration. 60 years of species who fundamentally disagreed on everything from atmospheric composition to acceptable breakfast foods, choosing profitable tolerance over open warfare. It was, by any reasonable measure, a miracle. Vel tried to remember that on difficult days. Section 7 was the station's oldest quarter, ancient, really, in the way that the original bones of something always feel ancient when everything built around them is newer and shinier. It dated back to the original construction, from an era before the Human Crest War, when humanity had first arrived in the galactic community. Loud, enthusiastic, diplomatically catastrophic, and wearing the most aggressively terrible fashion choices any species had yet contributed to the universe. That was then. Now, Section 7 was a graveyard of obsolescence. Storage rooms filled with decommissioned equipment, broken furniture, outdated data cores, and the accumulated debris of 6 decades of station life. Nobody went there if they could avoid it. Nobody thought about it much. It was the drawer in the kitchen where you shoved things you couldn't bear to throw away but had no intention of ever using again. The transmission signal was coming from deep within it. Vel stood in the communications hub, staring at the playback screen with the expression of a being whose understanding of reality was undergoing rapid, unwelcome revision. The audio was textured with static, old static, the kind that spoke of ancient equipment and degraded signal paths, but beneath the interference, the words were perfectly clear. Painfully, impossibly clear. "Station Command, this is Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Human Expeditionary Forces, requesting immediate assistance. Reactor containment failing. I repeat, reactor containment is failing. Please respond." Jex looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. "Sir." The word came out barely audible. "Marcus Webb died 40 years ago." "I'm aware," Vel said. His voice was admirably steady, all things considered. He had read the reports. Everyone had. Marcus Webb wasn't just dead, he was legendary. The kind of legend that gets taught in military academies across 6 species and printed on commemorative plaques in 3 different languages. The human lieutenant who had stayed behind during the evacuation of Outer Reach Station when the crash fleet had closed in. Who had manually sealed a catastrophic reactor breach, alone, while the evacuation ships fled. Who had held that reactor stable for 6 agonizing hours while radiation levels climbed to lethal multiples and the enemy bore down from every direction. Who had saved 40,000 lives. Who was, by any definition of the word that mattered, dead. "Play it again," Vel ordered. The message repeated. Word for word. Identical cadence, identical static, identical note of controlled desperation threading through a voice that had no business existing. Vel stood very still for a long moment.